Hello, this is a walkthrough of the quick start. So you're welcome to either read the documentation, which is all here, or you can watch the video if you get stuck at some point. So the first thing you need to do is think about your prerequisites. There's quite a few, so you need to have them. One is, the first one, you obviously need an Amazon Web Services account, right? You also need a Docker Hub account. You don't need to do anything other than create that account and know what your username and password are. You need to think about where you want to run your infrastructure, and in particular, you're going to pick a AWS region, for example, US West, US East 1, and you're going to pick two availability zones in that region, for example, US East 1A and US East 1B. So you're going to make note of those. You're going to need to make sure in your AWS account you have a IAM user with administrator access. So that's probably something you have if you have your own AWS account. Now, some of the things you may not have, you're going to need to have a domain name, either registered with Amazon or AWS, or if it's not registered with Amazon, you can actually just in the end, you essentially need a Route 53 hosted a zone, right? So that you can basically add DNS records to that domain name. So for example, just as a, and there's instructions in the documentation on that. So for example, if I go to my AWS console and log in, you can see what it looks like when it's set up. So if I log in and I go to Route 53, right? What you're going to need to have is one of these hosted zones, right? So I have one called todosrs.com, and again, this allows you to. This is where we're going to basically have our DNS names pointing to our various workloads. Okay. The next thing you're going to need related to that hosted zone, you're going to need a certificate. So this is an SSL or a TLS certificate. So that's under Certificate Manager. And again, there's instructions linked in the documentation that we're looking from how to do that. It's kind of outside the scope of this certificate. I mean, it just takes a second to do. But you'll need one of these. So what you'll need is a wildcard certificate. So for example, you see I have star.todosrs.com, right? And this certificate will allow us to run basically HTTPS for all of our endpoints, because we don't want to run anything over HTTP. Okay, so that's another requirement. Okay, now the other ones are more software. You need to have a Terraform installed on your machine. It's a client access tool, or CLI. You'll need AWS CLI on your machine. You'll need Kubernetes CLI on your machine. In particular, you want to install version 1.17. That's because the Amazon's Elastic Kubernetes service runs with that particular version, and you want to make sure your client and your server are on the same version, or at least one version off. So best bet is to have the same version though. And then finally, you're going to want to also have the Git client CLI on your machine, so you can interact with Git repositories, because that'll be part of this flow. Okay, with all that in place, we can actually start. If you have all that, you can actually start following these instructions, right? The first thing you want to do is we need to store your Docker Hub credentials securely, and you're going to use Systems Manager Parameter Store, and you're going to use the secure string feature. So let's show what that looks like. If you go back to AWS, and I think if you just start typing in Parameter Store, it'll come up with System Manager. It's where you really need to go. And then there's under Parameter Store is here. Okay. Now I already created these, mostly because I didn't want to show you what my username and password were, right? So you just hit the create parameter, you fill out the name, you make sure you say secure string, you just leave everything else default, you provide your value, and you're done. Okay. So that's pretty straightforward. So at that point, you've got your credentials securely stored away, and we'll use them later in the build process. Okay, next step is to download the Terraform configuration. So that's basically, this is the code or the configurations that are going to allow you to build out your infrastructure as code. Okay, so if you follow this link, you'll get to the current version as of this video is 0.10. There may be newer versions, right? Linked in this article eventually, but as it is, right now it's this version. So you download the code, right? And in this case, I'm going to store it on, let me get out of this window here. Put it on my desktop. Okay, and then unzip it. Go in the zip file. Okay. And go back to my documentation. So I got it on my machine. There's some updating we need to do. So we're going to need to edit some files in that folder. In particular, there's a Terraform TF folder, and there's two subfolders, pre-cluster and post-cluster. And we're going to start with the pre-cluster. So let me go maybe to just old school command line, desktop, starter kit. Okay, so I'm here. So I go to TF, and let me get my documentation over here. Edit the pre-cluster main.tf. Okay, so I need to go to pre-cluster main.tf. Okay, and it's going to suggest to make some changes. So let's see, up here. Okay, this talks about availability zone, right? So here I need to replace this availability zone with, in this case, I'm still sticking with US East 1A. You're welcome to use your own choices here. Then you do US. Obviously, these need to be in the same region. 1B. Ooh, I have a typo here. Maybe I can note to myself, typo. It's not 2A. Okay, it's 2B. So this should really see. That's what it should be. This is just comment, but it may be confusing. Okay, identifier. This is basically a unique name that we're going to use to identify our infrastructure in this region, and it has to be a valid host name. If you look at the docs, basic letters and dashes, right? And then this needs to be the region, US East 1. Okay, and obviously this needs to match up with our region, our availability zone. So I have US East 1A, US 1B, and US East 1. Okay, so that's all correct now. Okay, we did all this. We saved the file. I have a couple. There's a comment. This is a comment that's. I have little bugs all over the place. My documentation, that is. Let me make note of this. Update Terraform. Okay, so I got to get rid of that little blip in there. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is, now that we've done that, we're going to edit the same sort of things in the post-cluster folder. So I'm going to go. Okay, so it says going to here via main. Now I think it's suggested in the documentation here. Once you set these values, you're not going to ever change them as long as your infrastructure is in place. If you destroy it all, then you can change it and recreate it, but you don't want to really change these on the fly because it's pretty much sprinkled all throughout the whole config. So if you change these, it will send, and you try to reapply it, it'll basically tear out your whole infrastructure and put it all back in place anyway. So generally these are constants. So starter kit, and make this the same region, obviously, as you used for the first example. Both of these should be the same. So US East 1, starter kit, okay. Save the file. So let me save this file. Okay. And now there's some configuration variables, and these can actually be changed after the fact, although, right, so these are fine to change. Some of them which you probably won't change, but you can. So there's a file called Terraform TFRs, right? And there's the thing we're going to first do is we need to grab the certificate ARN, and it looks something like what's followed. Now, you actually have to go back into AWS console to get that. I mean, you can get it from the command line, but I just don't know. I figured some things are easier to do in the console. So certificate manager, and you click on it, and the ARN is this thing right here. So I'm going to copy this, copy, and I think I can get rid of this again. Back in here, get rid of this, insert, edit, paste, okay. And then the other thing that says to change is you need to change the zone name. In my case, it's todo's.us.com. Can you save that file? Okay, so there we go. Right, so we'll come back to some. There was another configuration file called workloads. We'll address that shortly. So I think now that we've done this, if everything's in place, should be able to just from pre-cluster. So you have to go change folders to pre-cluster. Right? And this is basically going to build everything up through the cluster. And then the second configuration is to build things in the cluster. So that's the distinction. So I'm going to do Terraform. See, first I'm going to do Terraform init. I'm going to pause the video. This takes about a minute to download all the plugins. So I'm going to pause and I'll restart in about a minute. Okay, I'm back. The next command is Terraform Apply. So this is what's actually going to do Terraform Apply. This is going to basically tell you what it's going to do first, which is going to build 27 resources, right? And then you just type in yes, enter. Now this does take about a half hour, maybe 20 minutes. So I'm going to pause the video, and when this is done, I'll restart the video. Okay, we're back. That just took about 15-20 minutes. And now I have got my pre-cluster infrastructure created. Let's see what the next step is here. So we did a Terraform Apply. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to basically confirm that we have access to this cluster. And the way we do that is there's a command here, AWS EKS update kube config region US East. Obviously change it to your region. Then the name is the same as your identifier. For me, it's starter kit. Right. So what that's going to do is configure your Kubernetes CLI to talk to your cluster. And you can verify that it's working by typing in a Kubernetes command, for example, kube control get nodes. And in this case, you can see that my cluster is running with 2 nodes. So that is good. Okay. The next thing we want to do is, well, we'll just do it and I'll explain as I go. So I'm going to run a different command here called kube control config current context. This is basically getting the identifier in your Kubernetes configuration, local configuration, and it's basically it's the identifier for the login, essentially, so for Kubernetes. So I copy that, okay, and then I want to edit a file in the post cluster. So I'm switching gears now. I'm moving over to the post cluster, and it's in the main.tf. Now there's a section here. We'll come to this in a minute, but you'll notice that there's 2 sections saying Kubernetes, and we're going to first work with the top one, and then we're going to work with the second one, and I'll explain why in a minute. So whatever I just copied, though, I'm going to put in where it says replace. Okay, that's there. Okay, so that's that step. Now, take a break for a second. The reason why that file had 2 entries that looked like the same kind of thing, and why we had to do this funky step here, is we're going to do a process where we're going to import a resource, And the import function in Terraform does not work with variables. And if you look back at that file that we just looked at, the normal configuration that we have here uses variables in this provider configuration, right? And that will fail if you try to import with it. So I manually, temporarily told Terraform that I'm going to use my configuration file that's on my machine to interact with Kubernetes, and then later on we're going to use it's going to use credentials that's going to download from AWS. So that's the main distinction here. So this is a temporary step. Okay, so back to the steps here. So this is where I'm going to do the import, and I'm going to copy and paste this because I don't want to type the whole thing. But what this is again, normally Terraform builds your resources as part of the code. In this case, this resource is already built, and we are going to import it into our configuration here. So I hit paste, and this place it's a Kubernetes config map we're pulling in, and I made a mistake. Oh, I missed a step here apparently. I forgot to run Terraform init. Okay, so that was a mistake. So Terraform init. This will take a minute or this minute will take. I'm going to pause the video. It probably takes a minute. I'll restart when it's downloaded. About a minute. Okay, and now I run the command that I meant to do. And if it works right, I should get a successful import of the, yeah, it did. So I pulled in this config map, okay? That's it. Now what I'm going to do is we're going to go back into that same main file, vi main.tf. And what I'm going to do is we're just going to, now that we've imported and we're not importing anything more, we are going to comment out the previous provider, and now we're going to use this provider. And basically, this just means that instead of Kubernetes authenticating using my local configuration file, it's actually authenticating using my AWS credentials, which is just less things moving. Okay. Okay, so now what we do is we're in a post folder. Now we build out all the form apply. We're building out sort of the, on top of the cluster, we're building sort of a common infrastructure to run our workloads. And you say, it's going to tell you it's going to build 8 things. You say yes, and then I'm going to pause the video. This will take, I think this one's like 5 minutes, and we'll rejoin the video at that point. So that's completed, and let's go through see. So we did that. Now, essentially at this point, we have our infrastructure to the point where we can actually start running our workloads, right? That's the code that we're really trying to run. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do an example one. Now, in terms of, I'll kind of summarize what we're doing here, but there's a documentation section linked into the same repository, right? That will give you more details on what precisely all these values are. So I'm going to copy this block. There's a file, I'm going to edit a file, the Tls Terraform.tf vars. Okay, see how right now the workload is empty? This basically means that this thing doesn't really do anything other than just, is ready to run the workload. So I'm going to paste in this block, and I'm going to kind of quickly summarize what this does. So what this is that the sample, that is an identifier. It needs to be like a host name, so letters and dashes, right? That's going to be part of our domain name. That is going to be what this endpoint will be available as. This external basically means it's a publicly available API. These limit CPUs, and memory, the request CPU memory, it's just basically setting up how much, this is a Kubernetes thing, but basically how much resources we're going to give to our process, right? And the probes are talking about whether our API is healthy, right? And then replicas is just how many copies of this we're going to run in our cluster. Again, the documentation will go through all the details, right? So by putting this in here, let's go ahead and add it. And then I believe we just need to run Terraform Apply. And it's going to check to see what needs to be changed. And it says it needs to create 14 things, and run yes. Now, the first time you run this, the first workload you add, it has to build some more extra infrastructure. So this takes about maybe 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes. So I'm going to pause the video and rejoin when it's done. Okay, back. Took a few minutes. One of the things we want to do after this runs, we want to copy the output. In particular, I'm going to copy the URL for the secure shell version, not the HTTP version. So this is basically what's behind the scenes. This one, we'll see it in a second, is that there's a code repository in AWS, a Git repository that we can push changes to, and we push it there. It will trigger new deployments of this app. And in particular, this is the URL for this particular workload. So each workload will get its own repository. So I'm going to copy that one. Actually, I just want to copy just the URL itself. Okay. Okay, so I'm there. Okay. So the next step is just verify that this actually did something. So to test it, you just go to, I think I called it sample, so it should be, if I go to sample todo's.com, I can see it's actually running something. Okay, so that's working. The next thing to do is we want to change it. You know, right now it's running hello world. We're going to want to change our code. So the first thing you want to do is, and you can follow these instructions on your own, but you basically need to configure your local Git CLI to be able to post or push into this repository, the one thing I just copied. And there's instructions on setting up secure shell with AWS so that you can then do that, essentially. So that's what that's about. So once you've done, and I've already done that. So once you've done that, you can now go to the next step. So what you're going to do is you're going to download some sample code. So if I go to this folder, I see example of a Node.js app, right? Again, the documentation for this there's some specifics, not too much. For example, you need to be able to leverage an environment variable in your code, but that's about it. But long story short, and right now it's only Node. The next release, I'm going to work on a Go piece, so you can then choose the type of workload. Right now it's just only running Node workloads. So I download the zip file and I save it somewhere. I'm going to save it to my desktop, and I'm going to extract it. Okay. Oh. Right. Did it extract it or not extract it? Let's see, starter kit image. Yeah, should have extracted it. Extract here. Okay, I did do it. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go into, I should have done, either way, CD desktop, starter kit image, Node.js. Okay, I made a mistake. So go back to here. Okay, so I downloaded it. Okay, now the first thing we need to do here is we need to convert this into a Git repository so that we can then push this to AWS, right? So what I'm going to do git init, right? And then I'm also going to run, I'm going to add a remote. So git remote add AWS. I'll explain this in a minute here. So basically I'm saying is, this is a local repository, right? I'm going to record a remote repository called AWS so that we can push to it. And this allows you to use origin, right, as wherever you're storing, what you typically use, as where you're going to store your code, sort of for code reviews on all that. So I'm going to add AWS, right? And let's go ahead and make an update, right? Let's go into edit. I'm going to edit a file. So this is just a regular Node application, nothing terribly special here. Does use Express, right? And I'm going to call this Hello World example. Example. walkthrough. Okay, so it's slightly different. Save the file. Right, see if I'll git add. Okay, so I'm going to do git. I'm going to basically commit a change. First commit. Okay, and what else am I going to do here? Committed. I'm going to push it. Git push AWS master. So I'm pushing the master branch to AWS, and it did it. Okay. Now behind the scenes, there's a process which is called code pipeline, and we'll look at it here. That's actually doing the build process itself and deploying. At some point, this will change. This app will change. Now, if you want to watch what's going on, console, you can log into the console. Log into something called pipeline, code pipeline. So if I type in code pipe, you will notice that our infrastructure now has a pipeline called starter kit sample. So the starter kit's the identifier, sample is the name of the workload. And you'll see a flow here where it tries to download the source code and then it tries to do a build. So I'm going to pause the video. It takes about, the first build takes about 5 minutes, and then subsequent ones take less, like a minute or so. So I'm going to pause the video. I'll restore this when it's done. Okay, we're back. Just took a few minutes. So long story short, you can see that this thing actually built. And if I was to go here, hit reload, now it says hello world sample walkthrough. So the idea here is, in order to build new versions of this workload, all you got to do is you just need to push to this repository. You do not need to rerun Terraform, right? This is the continuous deployment model here, where you just deploy the code and it will then build itself. Okay. Okay. So that's basically it on doing workloads. So the way you do more workloads, if you want to add a new workload though, not just change this current workload, you have to go back and create another one of these, another block, right? Specify the parameters. You deploy the Terraform, it creates a new workload, and then you push your code to that repository, and now you have another workload, right? So that's the basic flow. Now, what I'm going to do is also going to walk through how to take sort of undo all this, because let's say you were just learning this and you want to just destroy all this out now, right? So the first step of destroying it is you need to want to get rid of all your workloads first. You want to clean that out first. So the way you do that is you go back into your config, not this code, go back to cd starter kit 0.1, you go to Terraform, and you go to the post cluster, and you're going to edit the Terraform TF-vars, and you're just going to get rid of the workload. So you just delete the workload entry. I mean, you don't get the whole entry. You basically make an empty set or empty map, I think it is, right? And you just do Terraform Apply, and you let that run out. Can't remember how long this takes. It's basically undoing the last step we did. So it's a rip out 14 resources, and I'll see if this doesn't get done in 30 seconds. I'll pause the video. Yeah, I'll pause the video. This will take like a minute or so. Okay, we're back. Took about a minute. That got rid of the workflow. In fact, if you were to, if I remember right, this should now fail. Right? There's no URL for this, so it's failing. It's actually still spinning. The pipeline's gone, so I'm gonna get rid of that, right? So I just took out a bunch of stuff, right? The next step is to go into the post cluster folder, and then you run Terraform Destroy. So let's do that. So I'm in my post cluster, Terraform Destroy, and this will remove yet more resources. that are not specific to workloads, but they're in the cluster. So you run that and let this play out. And this may take a few minutes too, so I'm going to pause the video. Actually, I restarted the video. Right, so it actually did, this is expected actually. You notice it says, hey, one of the buckets is basically not empty, you couldn't delete it. And that's expected, and I'm not aware of a better way of doing this other than getting the error message, going to the console. The bucket in question is in the docs here. It basically says it is the one that's named with an identifier dash code pipeline. So I go into here, I go to S3. This is basically holds the artifacts for the pipeline. So it's starter kit dash code pipeline. Actually, if I can go back here, if I click on this, get rid of this, empty, copy and paste this, copy, paste. This is not a normal flow, so this is not entirely horrible because you probably won't be doing this unless you're just learning. And then you just basically rerun the destroy once you empty the bucket, and it will now destroy that bucket properly. It's going to say one's destroyed, it's destroying the bucket, and the bucket's going away, and the bucket's gone, right? Then you go to, the documentation says, you go down to the pre-cluster and you run destroy there. So that is the last step. If everything works right, so you go to pre-cluster, and this is going to basically back out all the infrastructure it created. Destroy. It's going to ask you, do you want to do it? Oops, I accidentally hit a character. So let me try it again. I accidentally hit a character, so that couldn't type in yes. So it says you want to delete everything. You say yes. And then this takes another about 5 minutes or so. So I'm going to pause the video until this is done. Okay, so that took about 10 minutes or so. And it has essentially backed out everything that we just created. So your AWS account should essentially be back to where it was before we started this whole activity. I mean, I think the only thing that might be left in there is the manually created secrets that we did early on for Docker Hub, because we did that manually because it's secrets. Okay, that's it for the video. Hope that works for you.